The home of jump racing. This is where the magic happens. Feel like a Cheltenham favourite with Paddy Power.
Welcome everybody to Road to Cheltenham. Ruby Walsh is here and we are delighted to have at least something, Ruby, to talk about this week.
Yeah, we're back on Zoom, Lydia, because I wouldn't go through the airports and put myself... I just didn't fancy hanging around all day the way flights are going. So, sorry, folks, we are back on Zoom, but that is completely my fault.
Yeah, I think it's entirely understandable with the weather as it is. It looks like we've got a pretty bleak weekend coming up. We're resting on Ireland to hopefully be able to host something for jump racing this weekend.
Yeah, it looks positive for Sunday. There's a thaw coming Saturday and a change in the forecast. There's rain forecast for Sunday morning. So hopefully we'll get Navan and Thurles Sunday and Punchestown Monday.
Yes, those reschedulings, we'll come back to that subject later on in the show. But first of all, not surprisingly, the frost has really preoccupied our viewers. So let's hear from Richard Hogan, who has sent us this question.
With freezing conditions taking hold across the UK and Ireland, should be looking to run fixtures at certain venues that have a better prospect of racing. For example, if the John Durkin had been run at Cork on Sunday and the remaining Punchestown card could have been run at a more suitable venue where frost is less of an issue.
Oh gosh, I mean, the whole country is affected at the moment, and Ireland. So, where would you choose?
And when do you choose and how do you choose? So, unfortunately, Richard, the frost doesn't come the same week every year or the same day every year at different times of year. So, no, look, and you start trying to do that and you'll put them in the wrong place.
I can understand, say, like the positioning of summer jumping or, deep winter ground, positioning your meetings where you might get raceable ground at either extreme. I can understand that. But with something like frost and snow and that kind of thing, it's just too unpredictable, isn't it?
It is. It is. It's not. Look, I know what Richard means. Obviously, when we had the really dry autumn, we were thinking, well, why aren't we still racing at Stratford or Worcester or even in Ireland in some of our summer tracks when our winter ones are still too dry? But I think with the frost and the cold, it's a completely different ballgame.
I've got a wild one for you. This is from Gary McDaniel, but he wasn't alone in asking this question. He says he'd like us to discuss the anger among some racing fans on Twitter that racing gets abandoned due to a frozen track. Nothing new. It's always been the case. What do the racing public want? Undersoil heating installed. Now, he is probably joking, but I have had correspondents who are quite serious about this and basically saying they don't want to hear excuses. They want racing to actually invest in something that prevents abandonments. What would you say to this idea?
Undersoil heating. Which one of the UK racecourses has won the Euro Millions? But
the cost would be immense. I mean, people make a comparison with football, but in terms of the acreage, it's a huge difference.
It is. Whatever, like even toying with the idea or listening to the idea, which is pushing my imagination. If you went to one of the smaller tracks, Fakenham, maybe Tremor, that are only 7 furlongs round, you still couldn't manage in those places, let alone going to one of the bigger venues. You're talking about miles of pipes as to what you would have in a football pitch. And how far down do you go? It gets really heavy ground. Oh, sorry, we can't race today because we're going to hit the underside heat.
Exactly. 500 kilogram of horse as well. It's just like, some race courses can't even afford comparable frost covers to the race courses who can afford to invest in that. I'm gonna take you away from left field and ask you a more central question, which is why is Ireland seemingly able to be more adaptable, more reactive, and be able to reschedule whole cards so quickly?
Much more flexible, but a completely different model as well. So obviously prize money is centrally funded. That's one big issue. So if you are to lose a meeting and it gets moved to a different race course, well, the prize money goes with it because it's centrally funded, barring the portion maybe a sponsor has put in, but HRI tend to make up that portion if a meeting or a race has to move venue. And why is it more flexible? Because we have more blank days. So there are more days to put racing in, and it's just more flexible. It's a different outlook, Lydia. but probably a different outlook on life as well. So they just are more flexible.
Horse Racing Ireland also owns and controls the fixture lists, and the British Horse Racing Authority doesn't.
Exactly, but that's getting into the politics of where all the issues are, and that is a big thing. I mean, it's Punchestown, and there are people giving out maybe last Sunday's John Durkin Chase should have been moved from Punchestown and staged last Sunday in Cork along with the Hilly Way. That would have been an option for horse racing in Ireland and for Punchestown, if they'd wanted to. I suppose the fact that Cork was not a guaranteed goer probably meant that they didn't do that, and they've rescheduled it for next Monday as a whole. But there is just flexibility and even the ability, I suppose, if you lose a meeting, you will be given a replacement meeting. So that works too. There's give and take, and I think everyone's getting the fair slice of the pie.
Right, let's move on to some actual action, shall we? And talk about the 2 mile chasers. And Energumene returned in the Hilly Way at Cork on Sunday. What did you make of that performance? I thought it was a school round, nothing really to beat.
That's exactly what it was. There is, I suppose, not a bit like Constitution Hill. He does have epitante, but there is a shortage maybe of horses to take him on in Ireland at that grade. And the Hilly Way, and with it coming as close to Christmas as it comes, Lydia, there has been for years now a split. So look, the Hilly Way wasn't the overly competitive. Epsom the Who, Master McShee, Born by the Sea. But what could Energumene do? He couldn't do any more than he did, but that's all he did. And look, we can look back at him. He jumped out. He went a really good gallop down to the first fence, or a decent gallop, and he pinged the first fence. But you can see him going to the second. He has a good hold to Paul Townend. He is enthusiastic. It's everything you'd like to see over the first couple. He rounds the bend past the stands then and has a look at the roadway on the way to the 5th fence, but jumps that fence really well. Then he got to the 6th fence, and I wouldn't say across wires. Paul Townend was sending him forward, and then Energumene decided to get in, popped it. He was good and quick at the 7th. He was brave at the 3rd last when Paul Townend was looking for one. The 2nd last, then he changed his mind again, but got himself out of it really quickly and popped the last. I mean, what more could he do? Did it blow you away? Was it spectacular? No, but it was great to see him. You know he's alive and well, and he's still in good heart.
Yes, I mean, it was a perfectly good performance. I suppose I was quibbling with the idea that he'd been impressive in any kind of way. He did what he needs to do. He also is although he makes mistakes, he never looks like jumping. We'll go into that in a moment, but just to sort of compare the pace that he went at or needed to go at, we're having a look at the Hilly Way versus the Mare's Novice, which was run over the same course and distance on the same day.
Yeah, and it was run about half an hour or whatever in front before it, so there can't really have been any change in the going. But you can see early on that Energumene is a bit in front of Dino Blue, which you probably would expect. And he is, for most of the first part of the race, he's only a couple of seconds in front of her, or maybe a second and a half, and he holds that advantage for a long way. But it does change later on because Dino Blue is involved in a race with Impervious, whereas Energumene is just coasting down the straight on his own, and the fillies or mares, do catch up later on and pass him out and finish in front of him. But that's only because of the way a race transpires, and you only have to do enough to win. Brian Hayes and Mark Walsh were all out. Paul Townend was simply coasting down the straight.
Yeah, absolutely. That we were just trying to show essentially how little the Energumene had to do in order to win like that. That was the purpose of that. But let's talk about Energumene and his jumping. You'll remember from last season that I was a bit obsessed with him adjusting to his right, and I wondered about the tricky second last on Cheltenham's old course. As it turned out, he did go through it, but it didn't affect him in any way whatsoever.
No, he didn't. He turns off the bend. Envoy Allen is pushing him. Funan Blue de Savola starting to fade a bit on the inside, and he gets to the second last, which he meets tight, but he doesn't get very high. But he keeps his head very high and doesn't get his back end overly high, which doesn't put him in any danger of falling. If their head goes forward and down, then it becomes a sort of an issue. And you could say Paul Townend had a really good hold of his head and didn't allow it to happen. But he does at Punchestown then, when we flick at the second last at Punchestown, Paul has a similar hold of Energumene down to the second last with Shack and Poursois. But this time he heads off to his right. So when he does hit the second last, because he's going right and doesn't land squarely in front, his head does nod and disappear and he stands up. But we saw him at the second last in Cork where he got low. He keeps his back end low and gets his head up in front. He knows what he's doing. And when he gets really close, he can hurdle a fence, but he does it in the right way.
So I suppose I'm wondering still about the second last at Cheltenham. I'm obsessed with this. Just what would happen if he were under pressure? Step forward a horse who could put him under pressure. Now, we're going to have a look at Edwardstone in detail. We did have a look at the Tingle Creek. We've saved him until this week to have a proper detailed look at him. This is a defeat of Grenadine, a horse who came into this race thriving, who loves Sandown, and Edwardstone just turned him away.
He did, and it was really, really impressive at doing it. Look, they went a decent gallop. Gentleman to Me booked out in front. We saw that he gets quite high at the first, but he does get in charge of the race. And to the second fence, then Grenadine launches and leaves Carrie Cobden slightly behind. But as they turn down the hill, Grenadine and Gentleman to Me, and they're striding along, the only horse who hasn't settled is Edwardstone at the back. He's still tanking under Tom Cannon. And he jumps the fence down the hill away from the stands. Shishkin jumps across, but Tom has no problem pulling him back. And if you look at the head on camera then, as they head towards the water jump, the only jockey who looks like they're trying to slow down is Tom Cannon. Everybody else is happy or to the pin of their collar. So they jump the water jump, head onto the railway, and Tom Cannon is still trying to slow Edwardstone down. Now he nods at the back of the first railway, but straight away comes back on the bridle. And when they jump the last one, you can see Harry Cobden has to squeeze Grenadine to keep him up onto Gentleman to Me, whereas Tom Cannon, he easily holds his position inside Nico de Bonneville. And when they round off the bend to face across to the pond fence, again, the only jockey who looks like he can go faster is Tom Cannon. Edwardstone travelled through this race so easily, pulls him out to the second last. He quickens to join Grenadine and jumps it well. Goes to the last fence where he has a look, flicks his ears, measures it perfectly, and then continues to pull away from Grenadine all the way to the line. It was a really strong performance, but should we have been surprised? Maybe I kind of was. I was thinking, oh, as an 8-year-old novice chaser, could he get any better? But maybe he didn't need to get any better. This is a rock-solid performance.
Yeah, towards the end of the last season with the 2 mile novices, people were wondering, well, how deep is that division? Edwardstone basically bossed the whole division until right at the very end of the season, he ran into Gentleman to Me. As we look back on that Aintree performance, how do we see their sort of relative merit? Did Gentleman to Me just catch Edwardstone at the end of the season, or is it the track, or what?
Possibly. Now, that said, Gentleman to Me did take 2 runs last season as a novice to win a chase, so maybe he will improve for his second run in the Tingle Creek as well. But one had gone to Cheltenham and had danced every dance. That was Edwardstone. Gentleman to Me, I suppose, cleverly snuck in the back door and robbed one off him.
I suppose, I mean, I was a big fan of Edwardstone last season, but the idea that he would be able to step straight into open company on his very first start of the season, with Alan King having said, they'd had some difficulty getting him fit. He had to take him in the end to 7 Barrows at Nicky Henderson's in order to give him a gallop, because the tracks where he'd wanted to start were just too firm for a big horse like Edwardstone. To come in and do that, it was hugely impressive. If you look back at the Arkle from last year, Ruby, in terms of a matchup between Edwardstone and Energumene, are there any kind of clues that you can get as to how the Queen Mother Champion Chase might pan out if they meet again?
I don't know. Look, we watched Energumene winning at Cork, making the run in last Sunday, but by the time Energumene had gotten to the Champion Chase last year, they elected to drop him in. So what way Willie and Paul will ride Energumene, that'll depend on what shape the race takes. We know how Edwardstone will be ridden. He'll sit behind the pace somewhere like he did in the Arkle. Now, you have to admire Edwardstone's intelligence. When you watch the 4th fence in last year's Arkle, Brave Shaska falls, but watch Edwardstone dance around him. Like, if you're on his back, like, that's give him a pat and take your hat off to him. But it's like, and that's the 4th fence. So they're round the bend, jump the fence down the hill. And by the time they get to the water jump, Blue Lord outside Edwardstone is quite keen for Paul Townend, but Tom Cannon is really back on it on Edwardstone as well. So they climb away towards the top of the hill, last ditch. And if you look inside Edwardstone at the Grey Horse of Tizards and Warlord and Blue Lord outside, they both meet the ditch long. Edwardstone gets close to it, but still makes ground on them. He's a brilliant jumper. He's a really quick, fast jumper. Down to the 3rd last when Riviere de Tel shoots across in front of him. Edwardstone doesn't deviate left or right. Now, he does it the second last when Riviere de Tel bumps into him, but he immediately comes back on the bridle to go to the last, jumps it really well, and again, like he did in the Tingle Creek, puts distance between himself and his rivals from their home. It was a solid performance. There's nothing you could knock about it. And when he's backed it up in the Tingle Creek, it makes the Arkle look all the more impressive.
It really does. I should have said meet for the first time between Energumene and Edwardstone, of course, in the Queen Mother Champion Chase. Let's have a look at the betting. Energumene was shortened after his win in the Hilly Way, which in terms of performance wasn't merited. But in terms of looking at the race itself and who are the players, I mean, at the moment, it's looking like a match, or the market has it as a match between Energumene and Edwardstone. There will always be threats come the day, aren't there? I mean, obviously, Greenatina's run well in the race before. Nubi Negra's run well in the race before. There's Blue Lord potentially, although Willie Mullins was talking about going up in trip. There'll always be other contenders.
And Shackleton well. You know, he has probably never delivered in Cheltenham, but he's still there. He'll go to Leopardstown at Christmas.
Wasn't Willie thinking about going up in trip with him this season?
He might have been, but he won't make the John Durkan, or wasn't going to make the John Durkan last Sunday. So he'll probably start. I can't imagine he'd go straight to 3 miles at Christmas. So I would be shocked if he does. I'd imagine he'll go 2 miles at Christmas, and then see where the season takes him. I suppose Energumene has put Shackleton in his place, but at Punchestown. But it'll be interesting, Lydia. There's always, I don't know, how do you shorten Energumene for last Sunday? Does that add up to a lot of prices for the Cheltenham Festival? Probably does.
Yeah, well, we'll come back to that. In a moment. The number of shorties, but yeah, the race itself obviously didn't merit it. But I suppose looking at the book, maybe that's what bookmakers are focused on. So give me your sort of view on the pros and cons at Cheltenham against each other. Energumene, Edwardstone. How you think it would pan out? How do you think the race would be run?
You have me caught now because I can't think of what would make the running. Maybe Gentleman to Me or Grenadine if they were to go there. Would Energumene look to outstay Edwardstone? I think a really strong gallop would suit Edwardstone.
They're both strong stayers at 2 miles, aren't they?
And they're strong travellers. They're both good jumpers. It'll be to form an opinion now as to what way tactically you would do that would be naive. I think you'd have to
look more at
their next runs and right up until the end.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But it might be interesting if they turn for home together towards 2 out. Now, one horse that won't be with them is Ferny Hollow, and I'm starting to think, Ruby, do you actually ever go to Willie Mullins' yard? Because I asked you last week where Ferny Hollow was, and you thought he was probably in the Hilly Way, and it turns out he's crocked again for the 3rd season running. I think you're just pretending. I think you don't actually ever go there. You know, come on, now's the time to fess up.
You got me, Lydia. You got me.
In all seriousness, it is a shame about Ferny Hollow. But he does look like he might be a thwarted talent.
Yeah, look, you did ask the question last week, and I didn't know the answer. But to be honest with you, horses like Ferny Hollow that are so injury prone, I don't tend to pay too much attention until I see them on the track, to tell you the truth. So, I prefer to look at the new talent that's coming through. And to be honest, look, it is what it is with Ferny Hollow, but history has a habit of repeating itself.
Yeah, certainly in terms of being an ante-post proposition, you'd already got that track record at the start of the season with him. But it's a great shame, and of course we wish him well for a full recovery. That is the 2 mile chases. We're going to move on to analyse this now.
So this week on Analyse This, the options for you at home to choose the race for me to analyse were Lily Pinchin on Dam the Sward at Cheltenham, Brian Hayes on Impervious at Cork, or Nico de Bonneville on Attacca at Cheltenham, and you chose Impervious and Brian Hayes at Cork. To me, it just proves you do not need 15 runners to make an exciting horse race. There was only 4, maybe 5 in this, 2 counted. And it was Dino Blue and Impervious. But it was Brian Hayes and Impervious that we're going to talk about, even though you have to mention how well Dino Blue jumped. Now, if you watch Impervious at the second fence when Brian Hayes gives her a squeeze, the trajectory of her jump, she gets up high in front, her knees are well over the jump, and she creates an arch. She does so again at the 4th fence when Brian squeezes her, and you're sort of thinking, this mare is limited in her ability, in her scope. And if you watch her at the 7th fence, how the trajectory of her front legs changes a little bit. She gets a fraction lower, and she's got a stretch in front to make that jump. Now the race does heat up, and Mark Walsh, cleverly using his jumping on Dino Blue, decided to make this not a sprint but a pretty fast finish down to the second last, and they are trapping on. Dino Blue is a brilliant jumper, but Brian Hayes can't back off, and Impervious answers him at the second last, but just about gets there. To the last fence, it's hammer and tongs, and you can't back out of it. But to be fair to Impervious, She answers the question, and she just about gets there. Momentum and speed get her off the ground, but her trajectory is low. It's straight forward. It's using speed. Her feet get on top of the fence, and off she gets. And that momentum keeps her up. Now, Brian Hayes had no option going to the last. He would slow down and get beaten, or ask the question and win. To be fair to Impervious, she answered, but it was only speed that got her there. Fair play to Brian Hayes.
So I was just struck, Ruby. I mean, Impervious doesn't look the biggest to me, but she's got some reach and she's brave when she's asked over a fence.
Brave is the exact word. Now, how many times would a horse do that for you in a race? Not that often. Brian Hayes, the way the race unfolded, left it till the last, and she came. But they're the finest of margins. And Mark Walsh, on the better jumper, banked on Impervious missing because he knew Dino Blue wouldn't. But that's the way you ride a race. You make decisions and you make tactical calls, and it just didn't work out for him. But I could see the way Mark Walsh was doing it, and it probably wasn't suiting Brian Hayes, but he got the better of it.
I'll come back to Dino Blue and Mark Walsh in a moment, but just to reflect back on the poll, I was wondering. Oh well, I voted for Lily Pinchin and Dame de Soir. What was your take on her?
The usual terms and conditions not apply. Are we not allowed? Are we not supposed not to vote? Like, I thought Lily was very, very good on Dame de Soir at Cheltenham the other day. Now, I thought Ben Post was very good in front as well. But to judge your ride, Cheltenham is an easy place to get sucked into asking for an effort too soon. And for me, it was Lily sitting from 3 out to 2 out. She had Ben Post covered, and she kept waiting on the opposition behind her. It's easy to say that's how you should do it, but when you're actually doing it, to have the confidence to wait, it is a hard thing to do. And then from the last fence home, I don't know what the politest way of putting this is, but when you look at Lily Pinchin riding, I do think she is the next generation of female riders. There is no difference when you watch Lily Pinchin to Ben Post. You would never say they're two people of different genders.
Here, right. Okay, let's move back to Dino Blue and Mark Walsh. When we compared the Mare's Chase with Energumene's Hilly Way, was there an angle whereby Dino Blue could have gone a bit faster? Because afterwards, Brian Hayes was talking about Impervious being right at the upper end, just hanging on in there. And might there have been a scenario where she could have been burned off and not close enough to get there, which she only just managed to do?
Yeah, there is, but that's the hindsight way of riding. That's how you learn from riding horses, and that's how you learn, or you think, how would I change that? How would I do it differently? So yeah, now I completely understand the way Mark Walsh rode Dino Blue. She's such a good jumper, 3 fences down the straight in Cork. You have to jump to win. And now all it was needed was Impervious not to make the jump at the second last or the last, and she only barely made the one at the last, and this result is different. And maybe Dino Blue isn't the strongest of finishers, Impervious is. So yeah, to answer your question, if you were having another go, or maybe riding her again, would you use her jumping earlier in the race? Now, she only needs to go a fraction quicker to drag Impervious out of her comfort zone. And if you can drag the horses behind you out of their comfort zone, they don't have that finishing kick that Impervious had. Now, you're also rolling the dice that you won't have the finishing kick too. But if you can win the race, she's more of a, I'm not going to say an undersold because he did battle, but there are loads of horses that need to win races early. Maybe Shack and Poursois.
Yeah, that's the one I was going to say.
That need to win races early, that need to put you to the pin your collar early. And maybe that is where Dino Blue will find the improvement needed.
So that sounds to me also that she's not really a Cheltenham horse, and maybe somewhere like, I don't know the Irish tracks as well, obviously, as you, but as well as I do the British tracks. Punchestown, would that?
Oh yeah, Punchestown. The Mare's Chase in Thurles is 2 miles and 6 furlongs, probably, or 2.5 actually. Sorry, that might be stretching her stamina, but tracks like Punchestown, Fairyhouse, fast tracks with a lot of jumping, would suit her. And we call them fast tracks. I mean, what's a slow track? Non-stamina tracks, I suppose. Fairyhouse and Punchestown wouldn't be stamina-laden tracks, and they probably would suit Dino Blue. But she could probably go a little bit quicker earlier and put your jumping under more pressure behind you. But you learn those things. That's why they're novices. You've got to figure it out as you're going along. And here I am defending Mark Walsh. I'm not defending him. I just know exactly why he rode her the way he rode her. if I was riding her the way she jumps, I'd have banked and winning the sprint with 3 fences too.
Here's a tweet from Gavin Greenwood, and he's noted as well about how well Impervious jumped on Sunday. She looks a fair price for the mare's chase, with the favourite not having jumped a fence yet. He refers to Allegory Devassi and is asking when Willie Mullins is going to be unleashing her. Obviously, she was entered, wasn't she? And the race was abandoned. I think she's entered at Navan on Sunday as well.
She is, and she would have most likely be in Limerick at Christmas too. There's a mare's chase there. I think Benny the Jew would have started in Limerick at that. That used to be a beginners. Now it's not a beginners anymore, but I imagine that'll be on Allegory Devassi's radar as well. But again, she didn't make Cheltenham last year. To me, it's not day by day, but it'll be run by run with her, and you're hoping you get her to Cheltenham. I prefer horses that don't go missing rather than ones that do.
She had a slab fracture in her hock, was what I remember reading.
It was, yeah, but once, you know what I mean? To me, I don't know. I was injury prone.
I know exactly what you mean. You know, once she, I mean, you know, I always think, you know, once is can happen, but once you start getting a pattern, then that's certainly from an ante-post perspective, and obviously from a personal perspective, if you're close to the horse. Let's have a look at the Mrs. Paddy Power mare's chase betting. And as Gavin was just referring to there, in many books, Allegoria Devassi, who's yet to jump a fence in public competitively, she is the favourite. Ahead of Impervious, is moved into second favourite. Now, they're both novices, and Ellie May, she's third in the betting. She won it last year. Scarlet and Dove conceding weight to the front two. She was third in it last year. Dolcita, who's beaten both of them already at Clonmel this season, she's fifth in the betting. I mean, it's not a novices event, and just because, you know, Colreevy managed to win it before, you know, you're going up against much more experienced horses. It's not the assumption. You can't make the assumption that they're automatically going to be able to slot in better, which is what the market seems to be doing.
I know, and does that go back to the ante-post markets we mentioned earlier on? I mean, like, to me, how do you know? How can anyone even believe that Allegory Devassi as a chaser will get to the level Ellie May and Scarlet and Dove are at? And I know Pink Legend was in there as well, because they were disappointed in Clonmel. You're automatically thinking, oh, write the two of them off, even though both of them have a pretty poor record first time out, and both are going to improve, and you haven't seen either since. Well, the weather hasn't held, but because the mare's chases actually aren't until January in Ireland, is the next mare's chase. So that's probably why you haven't seen either since. But I think they set a pretty high standard myself. And whereas Dolcita was able to come from off the pace under a brilliant ride by Paul Townend to beat them in Clonmel, I wouldn't be surprised to see that turned around. And I'm not magged on at that ante-post market. Maybe I would hope Allegory Devassi is the best, and I hope that the market is right, but it wouldn't interest me.
But let's remind ourselves what happened in the closing stages last season. Ellie May, who was second in the race the previous year, she won it. Pink Legend ran off her face for Venetia Williams. All of her horses were running really well at last year's festival. Scarlet and Dove in third. Again, as I mentioned, she conceded away. And Zambella was in there as well, pitching right up until the last.
She was, and Zambella's made a really pleasing comeback at Carlisle, but this was a ding dong, and it was at the end of a day where a lot of favourites had been going in, or fancied horses had been going in, and Ellie May was the end of a lot of accumulators. And look, she was really, really game and really tough, and made up for the year before when Colreevy touched her off. But you know, Ellie May, you have to give her credit. She's not the biggest in the world, but she didn't half try that day. And Scarlet and Dove came back to Punchestown and beat her. You know, so they're going to be in the mix, and to me, they're the standard bearers.
Yeah, I agree. And Ellie May, I mean, she didn't really seem quite at her very best last season, but she is so tenacious. She kind of lost her position early in this race, and then she was sort of squeezed out, had to be switched around by Mark Walsh approaching 2 out. And she had to be there at both the final 2 jumps, didn't she? And she was just there and trying all the time. She's a great little mare.
A lot to be said for her, isn't there?
Yeah, I think she's fabulous. Let's talk. You mentioned Pink Legend, huge run in second there. We've seen her already this season, and she was quite well beaten in the Peterborough chase. She seemed to make a mistake, over jump and nod early, and after that that was at the 4th fence, and after that it was all over.
Yeah, and that can happen. And different tracks where mistakes count and make a difference. But you get on the back foot jumping at Huntingdon, and I know there's a long run from 3 out to 2 out, but the rest of the jumps are crammed into one section of the track almost. It's a place you have to be on the button jumping. And when you lose a jumping in Huntingdon, you can run a stinker.
Yeah, it was a tough ask as well. An open grade 2 for her seasonal debut. She has won over the course and distance. That was the Lady Protectress last January, and maybe she'll be heading back there. Zambella, however, has already returned. She was second at Market Raisin, and then she went on to win at Carlisle in a race in which Riviere de Tel was very disappointing.
Yeah, and Riviere de Tel didn't jump that day. I know she had jumped out to her right at Navan, so you were thinking, oh, Carlisle will suit going right-handed, but it didn't seem to, and she was beaten so early. But I think Riviere de Tel can come back too, and she was a good novice last season, Riviere de Tel, so I wouldn't write her off on one run at Carlisle. But Zambella, to be fair to her, her jumping is rock solid, and she's a really likeable character. She beat Ellie May at Aintree first time up last year. That Carlisle race actually was transferred to Aintree last year, and Jockey Club Racecourse to Jockey Club Racecourse. Maybe that's the way it works, is it? Has to be kept in house.
There's an element of that.
And she was good that day, and she's just a little below the other two. Can she have improved? I don't know. She's the age profile to be improving.
Just the way she goes, keenly through races. I just think she's there to be shot at Cheltenham. There are other race courses that probably suit her better. I was worried by the way Riviere de Tel was holding her head and jumping. She just looked like she was very unhappy.
Something was at her, and yeah, but I think there's a lot of water to flow under the bridge. Hopefully it'll be sorted out a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she's got a huge amount of ability. We know that. Okay, so that has brought us up to date with the mares who are chasers so far this season.
The From the Horse's Mouth podcast every Friday. Fran Berry looking at Dundalk. We're on the road to Cheltenham now, though, Fran. So let's tell the road to Cheltenham viewers and listeners why they should be listening to us.
Yeah, look, fantastic show on a Thursday night, but the main action all weekend is Dundalk on a Friday night. Listen to our podcast, PK. We'll find winners in Dundalk. If it all goes pear-shaped, it's also known as the Road to Rouen. And Rory and Roy Delargy and Ruby also do a bit of tipping on the weekend as well. Quite a good show, not as good as the Dundalk effort, though.
There is some jumps racing in the weekends, but Friday Dundalk is key. Fran Berry, listen out first. We'll pass back to Lydia and Ruby, who know a few things about racing.
Right, our second talking point of the show is day one of the festival going to be the most one-sided ever? Now, this was prompted by a lot of your chat on social media, and John, who's at Vintage Mary 1, posted this tweet, which was accompanied, Ruby, to a lovely rendition of ABBA's Money, Money, Money. Too many short price favourites at the festival, the hoo-ha over the mare's hurdle, all those who favoured 4 days instead of the original 3. Have your cake and eat it, says John. So the concern is, of course, that Facile Vega for the Supreme, John Bon for the Arkle, Constitution Hill for the Champion Hurdle, and now potentially Honeysuckle for the Mare's Hurdle. Now, those are all best prices that we are showing you on the screen that they're available, that those might all end up being one-sided contests. Now, we'll go into that with a little bit more detail shortly. But first of all, this is what Henry de Bromhead said, which set off the whole hoo-ha.
She's brilliant. She owes us nothing. We're in bonus territory. It's incredible what she's done, and we've had a lot of fun with her, and I don't think it's finished yet. We can look at the Mare's Hurdle as well. That's always another option. Not
foremost in your mind though at this stage, I presume, is it?
Oh, it would be, yeah. Okay. Foremost would be a strong word. It would be very much in my mind. Yeah, it would. My job is to try and find the race I think she can win. So that's what I have to do.
So, Ruby, what did you make of what Henry said? I couldn't help but notice that a sort of smile crept into his features as he mentioned the Mare's Hurdle, and I thought that it was because he was aware of, what he was detonating in the background when he said it. But, he did confirm that it's a serious option. And Peter Maloney, who is the racing manager to owner Kenny Alexander, said, as per every year, all options are open, and the Mare's Hurdle is one of those options.
And it is an option, and if you're Henry de Bromhead, you're not doing your job if you're not considering all those options. Look, amateur sport is about taking part. Professional sport is about winning, and dress it up, make it whatever way you want. That is the bare facts of it. And I imagine they will run her where they think she can win, be that the Champion Hurdle or the Mare's Hurdle. Only time will tell, but that's his job. But, some people say, we won't get the clash between Constitution Hill and Honeysuckle. I think you'll have to see what she does at Leopardstown Honeysuckle and what sort of a performance she puts in there. To me, if she heads back to the Mare's Hurdle, I think she may well have gotten beaten at Leopardstown.
Yes, obviously, you know what happens next is dependent on the very next step in the Irish Champion Hurdle. I totally take that point, but I mean, the idea that Honeysuckle isn't going to turn up in the Champion Hurdle and try to become only the 6th horse in history to win it for 3 times when she's, you know, the title holder and has won the last 2 editions. I mean, Phil Richards, I think, sums up what most people feel about that. He says, "What's preoccupying my mind is the horrific thought of Honeysuckle going for the Mare's Hurdle. This is a 2-time and reigning champion hurdle winner. It'd be an insult to her if she ran in the Mare's Hurdle. It'd be like Lionel Messi dropping to League 2, Ruby."
Stradivarius dropping to the Doncaster Cup jumps to mind. It's a Group 2 after winning a lot of Group 1s, but also what you've got to remember with Honeysuckle is she missed her novice year there, and then she went back her first time and won the Mare's Hurdle. So then won 2 champion hurdles. So she's gone back to her 5th Cheltenham. And I know people will say, "Oh, see, Pigeon didn't win till he was 10 and something else didn't win till whatever age they were." But she's a mare and she's gone back to her 5th Cheltenham Festival. That's fair going in its own right. Is she entitled to be a little bit below? Probably. And if she is going, if she could be a little bit below, we'll know after the next race. And that's why some people never make plans or unveil what they're thinking, because all it creates is discussion on what if and what and what might be or what won't be. But
discussion's part of the fun, Ruby. I mean,
possibly it is, Lydia. And I think I'm not being drawn anymore on it. I see her in Leopardstown anyway. What'll be will be.
One thing I will say though is obviously Constitution. I mean, I think Constitution Hill is a monster. I do think the easier option is the Mare's
He's not
Hurdle.
a monster. He's a racehorse.
Well, you wait to see him coming over the hill. But Epatante, you know, over 2.5 miles, she's got going to be no pushover. There was only 3.5 lengths between her and Honeysuckle in the Champion Hurdle last time, and Epatante made a chance-ending error, or a chance of being closer ending error at the last. And it was a career best performance on her very first try at 2.5 miles, or her most recent try at 2.5 miles in the Aintree Hurdle. You know, that the concept that the Mare's Hurdle would be an easy option, I think it's an easier option, I think is misplaced.
So would I. And look, we're talking about a very one-sided opening day of the Cheltenham Festival. I thought it was going to be very one-sided in 2015, but it just didn't work out that way.
What could you possibly be referring to? We were thinking that we were going to play a montage of that, and we took pity on you, Ruby.
Probably must be the only ones.
Probably. Nigel Keeling wonders, as a result of what Henry de Bromhead said, will Bob Ollinger be dropped in trip and go champion hurdle? Different owners. They're going to be doing what's best for the individual horses, aren't they?
I'd say listening to the trainer, they're going to be doing what's best for the horses.
Yeah. But you know, you can see it. Bob Ollinger really, you know, travels strongly into his races. You know, I can see why the conversation is being had, can't you?
All possibilities.
Let's focus on this one-sided first day then. Facile Vega, 5-4 for the Supreme. I mean, I find that price daft. Now, he might well turn out to be all that, but as we explained last week, he didn't really achieve much on the clock last time. He was, you know, he turned up, he jumped round, he was hard to pull up, but so he should have been going at that pace. Most of the horses that will be his key rivals we probably haven't even yet seen, and he's already 5-4. I think that's a daft price, personally. I couldn't go anywhere near it. You?
Neither could I, but then the other side of the coin is, would you lay Facile Vega?
Yeah. I'm not very good at laying, so I try to stay. I try to have a positive outlook, Ruby.
Yeah, well, there's the argument. That's what people will say to you. Like, would I back him? Absolutely not at 5-4. But would I lay him? Most certainly not. So to me, like, it's ante-post betting. So take whatever.
John Bond 5-4 for the Arkle. Now again, he's more proven than Facile Vega. I think he's very good indeed. But he hasn't encountered any of the key Irish opponents, many of whom haven't even started over fences yet.
No, he hasn't. And look, what did he beat? El Fabiolo on entry last year? Neck, half a length, whatever it was in the end. But obviously we haven't seen El Fabiolo, so you're going on John Bond's evidence from Warwick and Sandown over fences. But when you look back at that entry race and you watch El Fabiolo, at the third last hurdle, when the horse in front of him, Salamanca Bay, unseats rider and interferes with El Fabiolo, John Bon pinched a couple of lengths there that Paul Townend had to go and make up. Now, John Bon was better at the last than Il Fabiolo, and then John Bon probably outgrinds Il Fabiolo in the last 100 yards. So I can see people saying, oh, Cheltenham with the hill, he'll definitely outstay Il Fabiolo. It's a fraction shorter at Cheltenham than it is at Aintree. It's 1 mile, 7.5. And who knows what fences could do to Il Fabiolo as well. And that's just mentioning him. And there are loads more novices, just like there are more horses that are going to come and take on Facile Viga. Look, we know Constitution Hill pretty much what he's going to have to beat, even if he has to beat them all or doesn't have to beat them all. And the Mayor's Hurdle could be interesting. The one that's probably the right price is Constitution Hill.
Yeah.
The rest are dubious.
Now, of course, there are lots of novice chasers that Gordon Elliott has already unveiled, and he looks particularly strong in that division. We haven't seen potentially some of the key novice chasers from Willie Mullins, the horses that might be taking on John Bon at Cheltenham or elsewhere during the course of the season. And so we asked you which Mullins machine, twinkle in our eye, will pose the biggest threat to John Bon and why. Ruby, we went A, Sir Gerhard, B, El Fabiolo, C, Dysite Dynamo, and D, Appreciate It. You know, from your expertise in the yard, you know, when you were passing by outside at one point, which of those would you have voted for?
Sir Gerhard.
Why?
Ballymore winner. I know he disappointed at Punchestown last year. He schooled well. I think he's the best horse, Lydia. Right,
so Ruby, you would have helped Sir Gerhard a little bit. He's finished second in this poll. He got 29%.
I abide by the terms and conditions.
Good for you. Very above board. 30.8 El Fabiola has won. Appreciated in third with 22.3% of the vote, and Dysart Dynamo trailing in last at 17.9% of vote. Now I put these four in because I'm regularly via our Road to Cheltenham hashtag get asked questions about these four and, you know, people's excitement about when they might turn up. A few of them are entered over the weekend if that racing goes ahead, and they're mostly double entered over Christmas in the grade ones at Leopardstown and at Limerick. The exception is Dysart Dynamo, who isn't in at Limerick, just at Leopardstown. Some really, we've talked to Gerhard, we've talked to El Fabiolo. Dysart Dynamo, who fell heavily 3 out in the Supreme, was quite well beaten by Mighty Potter at Punchestown. He nonetheless looks an exciting horse. Lots of people are looking forward to seeing him.
Yeah, but again, history is a habit of repeating itself, and trainers are creatures of habit. I would expect to see all of those in a beginner's chase before you see them in a graded chase, and be that from Punchestown's rescheduled meeting on Monday, Naas Tuesday, if there's racing the weekend, and through the beginner's chases all over the Christmas period. I imagine you'll see all 5 of those with a bit of luck, but I'd be surprised if you saw any of them in the graded chases.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that had been the long-term plan, but the ground just hasn't allowed them to be out and the weather soon enough in order to have the first step to be able to get to the graded chase step. Appreciate it.
And if they're not in, they can't win. So again, when you look at those graded races, and by the time declaration time comes around, if some of the bigger names go missing and they're less experienced horses in them, then you could see Willie Mullins running one. And that's why he has them entered.
Yeah, I get that. Appreciated. I think you had mentioned earlier in the series that he maybe of all of those has the most to prove going into his novice chase season.
I think he does. I mean, it's 19 months ago now, Lydia, since that performance in the Supreme. But last year he had one run, the Champion Hurdle. He was a poor 5th. Yeah, to me, he has a little bit to prove now.
And you mentioned 5, which I think was subliminal because there was a lot of outcry about where is Flame Bearer? Everybody was saying.
I assumed you had him on the list. I mean, how did you leave him off?
Epic fail. No, just 4 options. I mean, this is typical from Lloyd Murphy. By all accounts, Flame Bearer has schooled very well. If you read Brian Hayes's blog post a few weeks ago, electric, the word used. Direct quote, I was on a decent horse, but I could not live with his speed over a line of fences. He also says that Dysart Dynamo might serve it up to him. So Flame Bearer, another one to bear in mind, used to be with Pat Doyle, was entered at Navan, didn't run because of the ground.
Yeah, he is. A lot of his best form, though, was he campaigned at 2.5. Could he go up and trip? He's forward going, big, strong, keen horse. Yeah, I've watched him fly by on the gallop 6 months ago. The last time I was there, but yeah, he looks a decent horse anyway.
Were you there? Were you? Let's move on to the juvenile hurdlers. So it's been a while since we've had a proper look at the juvenile hurdlers, but let's start by looking at what Blood Destiny achieved at Cork on Sunday, Ruby.
You'd have to be impressed, Lydia. He was quite high at the first hurdle and jumped a bit to his right. There was no real pace on, and he jumped to the lead at the fourth hurdle. That was taken off him again. He got high again at the fifth hurdle, but you'd love the way he jumped the sixth. And the further he went, the better he got. Into the home straight to the third last. He gets a fraction higher behind than he should, but he was quick and clear to the second last, which he was good at. And he was fast at the last and sprinted away to beat Sir All and Tea Garden Jazz. It was a visually impressive performance. I can't imagine it was overly impressive on the clock. And he does look like a horse who will stay really well. And he looks a more National Hunt type looking at him than an ex-flat horse.
Yes. Okay. It was interesting afterwards to hear that he hadn't really been impressing Willie Mullins much. And then he wasn't there for his last bit of work. And that's when Paul Townend saw something that he liked.
Yeah, and Paul was right because he was impressive on Sunday. Now, I'm not saying it was an outstanding contest and he did what he had to do, but he does look exciting.
He does. Okay, well, let's have a look at the Triumph Hurdle betting, shall we? And see where it is that he stands. Lossiemouth, who we will look at in detail in a moment, who won the Grade 3 Juvenile at Fairyhouse. She is the favourite ahead of the runner-up, Zarek the Brave. Cougars there. Saint-Donat is interesting. And Blood Destiny is there, available to the best price, 20 to 1 if you shop around, 16 to 1 more readily available. And Andrew Napper likes Blood Destiny, but it made him start thinking about the French form as well. Thinking how about the Blood Destiny winners, given that French form against Bose, and a hell of a boost, think the Triumph could be a cracking race this season. And there are a number of French horses in that betting, including Saint-Donat. And I spoke to my French correspondent, Alan Potts, about Saint-Donat. He said it's a fascinating horse, owned and bred by a family that used to have horses with the Reeveleys. That link is continued with Saint-Donat as James Reevely rides him in France. The dam was trained by Keith and the second dam by Mary. The latter was the very useful staying hurdler, Morello. He said he has a couple of reservations in terms of the Triumph, and that would be the stamina in the family, also his front-running style of racing for the new course at Cheltenham. And he points out that Hugo Merrienne has only ever had a couple of runners over here. So that is Saint-Donat. Another interesting French recruit is Gala Marceau, Ruby, who apparently is at Willie Mullins.
Yeah, Bay, I think she's a filly. Gala Marceau. Bay light filly, but came from France. She's in full training, I knew, Lydia.
What do you think about the French horses immediately transitioning to Irish and British racing? Because they're very different in terms of the obstacles you face, the tempo of races, not to mention the new environment you suddenly find yourself in.
Yeah, I don't mind the obstacles. I think that doesn't bother me. It does depend on the individual, and you often hear Paul Nicholls talking about it, and he uses the word acclimatizing. Yeah. Willie Mullins tends to put horses away. If you look at those winners, those French horses, they run as 3-year-olds quite early in France. So they've been in training as 2-year-olds into their 3-year-old season, and then they come from France to Ireland or England, and they miss a summer break, and they're back into training, and it can become a very long season for a lot of them. Personally, I think most of them are better off given a break, and a considerable break, and starting from scratch again in a new environment, in a new regime. Willie does it with a lot of horses. Obviously, with winners, your hands are tied a bit because they're not going to be novices the following season, and you have to crack on with them. But with maidens, I can see why you would try and put them away and go with them as 4-year-olds rather than 3-year-olds.
We had a few French recruits to underperform compared to expectations. Blue King Doro for Paul Nicholls, Mombasa for David Maxwell, even Old Victoria, who we'll see at the moment, for Gordon Elliott. She ran at Aintree. But let's have a look at that Grade 3 at Fairyhouse, Ruby, won by Lossiemouth and Zarek the Brave. We looked at it time-wise as a comparison last week. It was a slowly run affair. It
was. Boy made the run, and Lossiemouth is the grey in the middle of the shot, and she sits in sort of halfway. Now, she does end up wide on the track in Fairyhouse. To the third hurdle, you can see her off to the right as we're looking, which will be the left as Danny was riding her. And when they swing across to the fifth last hurdle, you can just see she's 6 deep on the track. So she did, in a slowly run race, have quite a wide passage. Now, to jump the third last again, she's way out there and off the bend. It looks like Zarek the Brave is locked up in front, or not locked up, he's behind Ahaboy, and he looks like he's locked up. Comfort Zone is directly behind him, but Paul gets a great run through, and Zarek the Brave going to the second last. Now, Zarek the Brave doesn't fly it, Danny does, but what's Comfort Zone in behind is the hurdle gets knocked. He goes way up in the air and gives away his chance in a sprint finish. Lossiemouth sprints to the last, but her speed through the air at the last hurdle is champion hurdle-esque. She's really, really quick. But I do think this was a much different race to the one that Zarak the Brave ran in at Fairyhouse 3 weeks prior to that. That was a stamina-laden contest. This was a sprint, and Lossiemouth is the fastest. Now, do the fastest horses always win triumph? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You could say, yeah, Vauban maybe last year against Field Door, but I'm not certain that the fastest horse always wins the triumph. And I would think Blood Destiny or Zarak the Brave could be stronger stayers than Lossiemouth.
Certainly Zarak the Brave ran up to 2 miles, I think, on the flat, didn't he, when he was trained in France? I was impressed with Lossiemouth, bearing in mind that's only her second ever appearance on a racecourse. I think, she's clearly got a huge amount of ability, but I take your point about Zarak the Brave probably being unsuited by a speed test. A day earlier, we had a listed juvenile mares or fillies race at Aintree. This brought out a fantastic finish, really compelling. It was a 3-way go, and it was won by Dixon Cove.
Yeah, it was. And again, the race was, this race was spread out a bit. Dixon Cove was always in a good position under Harry Skelton. Now, the second hurdle, you can see her, she jumps off way out to her right. But there wasn't nothing too wrong with that. Fourth hurdle, she gets very high. But as they swing back into the home straight in the second circuit, Harry, because she's going right, elects to come stand side, and the race develops all across the track. And your eye is always drawn to the blue colours and Brian Hughes, who Stuart Machin was well able to pronounce, but I'm struggling with. Isadine de Chambeau.
Isadine de Chandeau?
De Chandeau, that'll do. And she travels really strongly to the last hurdle, but doesn't find too much. On the inside is Calico, who had been beaten at Punchestown, and Dixon Cove definitely stays the best under the stands rail for Harry Skelton. It was a solid performance, Lydia, but does that race blow you away? I'm not sure it does.
I like the attitude of the first and second, and clearly that I think they're both very strong stayers. They're the kind of juveniles who are going to need a trip in time, aren't they? And they're not going to get anything that's really very suitable for them, particularly as they go higher up in grade during the course of the season. And I think Isadine de Chandeau is a lover, not a fighter. Let's talk about Nusret, shall we, and his win at Punchestown. He was due to run, I think, last weekend. It gets so confusing, but the race was abandoned. But we should have a look at his win at Punchestown in November.
Yeah, and he did it well. He sits in quite a long way back in the big field maiden hurdle under Darrell Jacob, and he gets himself to the rail away by the stands. But when they run down to the third hurdle, you can see he's wandered to the middle of the track. He was quite green. Now, they bypassed the hurdles in the back straight because of the sun, but as they get to the second last hurdle, you can still see he has 6 or 7 in front of him. Now, Nusret was riding this way on the flat as well. He was riding always to close, and he had a good turn of foot. He sides through the field on the way to the last hurdle. That's Calico that's in front, who we saw behind Dixon Cove and Aintree. Jumps the last really well and quickens away to the line. He was green, but he's a fast horse, and going up in trip in better company, maybe jumping will make him a better horse. He wasn't that straightforward on the flat, or didn't win often enough, to tell you the truth, but maybe jumping will help him to win a bit more.
Absolutely. He was best at 1.5 miles and -6, ran 6 in the Melrose, didn't he? He was due to run, of course, in the Summit or the Finesse at Cheltenham, but both of those contests were called off, Doncaster and Cheltenham respectively. So that's the update of the juveniles, and I'm sure we'll be looking at them again in the new year. To finish, we're going to update you on the novice hurdlers. Now, I really liked this staying novice hurdle at Cork on Sunday that was won by Hidden Valley Lake with Cool Survivor and Monbed Park in behind. It was run at something of a crawl and then a sprint. Yeah,
it was. So they hacked up to the first. No one really wants to go on. Cool Survivor does go on by the time they get to the third hurdle, and he's a good old grab at it in front with Davy Russell. Seventh hurdle, Hidden Valley Lake guesses at that one, and at the 8th, Cool Survivor does the slow. Probably not going fast enough. I thought watching it live visually, they actually had gone a good gallop, but you put it against the clock, Lydia, and it didn't stack up. Across to the third last hurdle, there's still a load of them in it. They're all there with a chance. Davy Russell comes wide on Cool Survivor. Rachel has to go to the far side on Hidden Valley Lake. He's awkward at the third last, lands on all fours, gets to Monbeg Park going to the second last, and then shows a good turn of foot on the approach to the last. Now, he's long and low at the last, Hidden Valley Lake, but he does stretch right away from the field, and I think he impressed you a hell of a lot.
Yeah, he really did. He made me part with money. That's how impressed I was. So if we have a look at the Albert Bartlett ante-post market, it's all a bit jumbledy at the moment, isn't it? Grange Clare West is the ante-post favourite, and Hidden Valley Lake is essentially second in. You can still get 8-1 if you shop around Hidden Valley Lake. I look back at everything he's done. I like the fact that he dealt with a crawl and then a sprint. The distance he put between himself and the rest. How he responded to just one reminder from Rachel Blackmore after the last. He really had plenty left. The fact he was able to win over 2 mile 3 at Naas previously, that form has worked out really well. I even went back and had a look at his point-to-point win when he was really point-to-point run. He's really unfortunate not to win because he got carried out approaching the last. And he's also going the Monolith Minella Indo route to the festival, to Albert Bartlett, via that race in Clonmel. That's how I'm selling it. You buyer?
No.
No. What don't you like?
8-1.
Ah. What would have tempted you to go?
I can't imagine he'd be much shorter by March, so I'll keep my money until then, and at least I know he's actually in the race.
Just because you got 66-1, don't it's just showing off by implication. Let's have a look at his stable companion, Arctic Brazil, shall we? Who won earlier on the day and beat Mercury at odds on.
Yeah, well touted, really well touted. But this is a muddling race as well. Up to the first hurdle, Paul Town and Rachel Blackmore, and it's a game of cat and mouse. Neither of them want to make it. Second hurdle, they both land, they both pull back. Third hurdle, they both land, they both pull back. And eventually, after the fourth hurdle, Rachel goes on and Arctic Brazil. But he misses the fifth. Way better at the sixth. Mercury then jumps up beside him at the seventh. It's into a bit of a race off the home turn to the third last, but quickly Arctic Brazil is in charge. Jumps the third last and away with him. Messy at the second last, but then quickens again going to the last and pulls right away from Mercury. This was a good performance. He was well touted last week at Fairyhouse when he didn't run against Facile Viga. He was taken out, went to Cork and didn't miss.
Yes. Henry de Bromhead said his wife Heather was reminded of Sizing John when she first saw Arctic Brazil, and that horse goes next to the Moscow Flyer. Let's go to Cheltenham on the Friday, where Attica beat Master Chewy. It all came down to the final hurdle. I really liked how quick in and out of hurdles Attica was.
He was very good. Made the running for Nico de Bonville. Jumped the second hurdle really well. Fourth, even when he was in tight, Lydia, he was quite nimble. But fifth hurdle, up to the fifth hurdle, you can watch Nico. He slows this down. He's controlling it in front. And when he gets off the top of the hill to the end of the running rail, turning for the second last, he starts to up the ante. Doesn't send it, but just wants to go a bit quicker. Jumps the second last well. Off the home turn, Sam Twisting comes to him on Master Cherry. And as you said, it got down to the jump at the last where Attica was better than Master Chewy. And then he digs in and he just sees off Master Chewy. And the more you look at it, the last 100 yards, you're thinking, I'm not so sure if Master Chewy jumped the last, would he have won anyway? I think Attica was just tougher.
Yes, and as Nico de Bonville had saved plenty in front. They're going up in trip to 2.5 miles next. Still some promise from Gentle Slopes in behind, who plainly shapes as though he needs a trip to me. Sticking with the novice hurdlers, we are hopeful that Navan will be on Sunday. This is for the Tote Navan Novice Hurdle Grade 2. How are you seeing the key players in this, Ruby?
I think the ones we've only seen once. There's a couple of really nice horses that could make their second start. In the Pocket was a really good winner for Henry de Bromhead at Wexford in the JP McManus colours. Thought he's really interesting. I thought Deeply Superficial was very taking at Galway. Davy Russell rode her. We spoke to Davy when he was on the show about her. And I thought Absolute Notions in the Rob Kerr colours was a pretty impressive winner at Punchestown as well. But they're the ones that we've only seen once. I think if there's going to be a champion there, it'll be one of the three of them.
Okay, and then there's Thurles as well with the Mares Novice Hurdle. You've got the likes of Harmonia Maker for Gordon Elliott, one of several that he's got entered in the race, and the Model Kingdom as well for Noel Meade.
Yeah, the Model Kingdom's a sharp filly, but Harmonia Maker will be dropping back in trip from her Fairyhouse run. But I thought she was really, really good at Fairyhouse. Galloped horses into the ground, dropping back in trip, sharper, faster track at Thurles, but I think she has the ability to get the job done.
Well, so hopefully we will be analysing those races this time next week. What we'll also be doing, Ruby, at Road to Cheltenham, the Christmas edition of Road to Cheltenham, is looking ahead to all of the key action. And the really good news is that hopefully we'll be seeing A Plutar, because Henry de Bromhead thinks he's found the source of the problem in the Betfair Chase, which has got to be a relief, hasn't it?
Yeah, but I hope that it was the issue, Lydia, and we see the real A Plus Tard at Leopardstown in the Savage Chase. And yeah, he has to be a draw.
We'll be talking about all of the action at Leopardstown, at Limerick, at Kempton and everywhere else over the winter period this time next week, reflecting on whatever racing there has been during the past 7 days. It could actually be a very busy show. In the meantime, if you fancy reading the column, it's racingtv.com/
Saturday will be boring enough now without spending the whole day reading that.
You've got to find a new joke, Ruby. You've got 7 days to do so. It's a challenge. See you next week.
The home of jump racing. This is where the magic happens. Feel like a Cheltenham favourite with Paddy Power.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.